All right.
And this is the Wheel of Fortune, letter 10.
Letter 10, the Wheel of Fortune. Um, I like to sort of, I try to come up with a summary by the end of the chapter of the letter of sort of like a soundbite phrase or something that I feel like the card, um, to wrap up what the card is for me at least. In this case, I think of the Wheel of Fortune as being a card which, in Tomberg's world, depicts the destiny of Hermeticism. It's the path of destiny of the Hermeticist. So whether or not, that's just my take. The art. So we'll start with the image as we usually do. The image of a rotating wheel with spokes with a center, and perched on top is the figure of the Sphinx. There's a monkey descending on the right side, and there's a no monkey descends on the left, and a dog rises on the right. So there's a dog rising up towards the Sphinx, and a creature, a monkey descending down. So that symbolic movement is important. The Sphinx is situated above the movement of the wheel on top of a platform, and has a crown, a sword, and wings. And these are all symbolic things. So the wheel itself represents the circular motion. Obviously, it's going to be a big part of the discussion uh, coming forth about the closed circle and the open circle versus the open circle. So, so we ask, why is there a monkey and a dog circling in this absurd game? But so this is mapping out on the wheel. He maps out the categories of de-evolution, represented by the fall from the heavenly realms, the fall of man from the divine realms. It precedes the monkey and the three kingdoms below mankind, which are the mineral, plant, animal, represent the extraterrestrial vestiges of the degeneration and degradation of Adam. The human prototype, for example, and I'll just give you an example of this that I've come upon in my own thinking, which is the snake. A snake represents the human spine exteriorized. And when you see the devil depicted, you often see the devil depicted with a serpentine tail with an arrow pointing downward. And I would argue that that is a snake-like image, and it's a symbol of the spine, the human spine, with the downward motion, which is a de-evolutionary movement. The other thing, and this is just a quick aside that just came to me, which is someone once showed me a spine. She called it the Kundalini. She called it the serpent in a box. And she took it out and she showed me this human spine. And at the bottom, where the tailbone is the sacrum. It's called the sacrum, and the sacrum looks just like the head of a snake, and it has even holes in it that look like eyes. It is extraordinary. It is, and you understand, where the idea of the snake is pervasive in as a foundational structure of man. So that's I'm sorry, that was just a detour. So there's de-evolution on the left side of the wheel, and then there's evolution on the right side of the wheel. Evolution represented by the dog, who aspires to be close to humanity. Hello, good morning, Michelle. Good to see you. So the monkey face is human and represents the fall of humanity, the prototype of being. The angelic and human elements are all contained in the Sphinx, in the crown, the wings, and the sword. And so I'm not going to get into this too much. That's one of the ideas. So he goes into scientism, which deals with only half the circle. That scientism is only concerned with evolution, biological, scientific evolution, and doesn't take into account the descent of de-evolution of the fall, which is what Tomberg calls the totality of things, the whole picture, the big picture. Um, but see, he thinks that if you're only taking in the ascent of evolution, that path, that it's absolutely unintelligible to the thinking mind, because you're reducing thought to a lethargy. Thought has to reduce itself to the idea that everything evolved from, just these random elements that somehow coalesced and came together. And this is where he criticizes the idea of evolution as a purely scientific theory. Okay, not evolution as a progressive spiritual theory, but as a biological theory. Okay, the other half of the circle is the fall, which represents the involution of humanity, and evolution to him represents salvation. And he goes, he talks about Teilhard de Chardin, and the Hermetic biblical Christian doctrine differentiates between the Eastern doctrine of the wheel. So he does always feel that he has to address the Theosophists. And so the Theosophists will talk about the Eastern philosophy of the wheel, which is mechanistic. It's like the breathing of a living organism, but it's just a mechanical process. So the Buddhists believe that you escape the wheel of suffering, and the Hindus believe that the cosmos just breathes in and out in an endless cycle or wheel of existence that just disappears and reappears. So, but the Hermetic biblical Christian tradition is the dramatic saga mapping the hero's journey through perdition and culminating in salvation and redemption. He goes on to explain this, the difference between exoterism and the esotericism. He goes on to talk about, being a passenger on a boat as opposed to being the crew. The passengers are the exoteric. The passengers live in processes. They just live in the horizontal plane of processes. Esotericists live in the tragedies and dramas and the mysteries. That's what esotericists, they're part of the crew. They see the workings of the ship and they know what's going on with the ship. So natural selection and spiritual selection. He distinguishes between natural selection and spiritual selection, which he calls election, actually, spiritual election. It's evolution understood as a cosmic process, exoterically and esoterically as a drama or mystery. Then he goes into the whole cosmic myth of the Sabbath, at the open circle, the Sabbath representing that place of stillness on the seventh day in Genesis when God had completed his creation, and there's a pause, and that represents an opening in the cosmic circle. It's the opening. It would be the cosmic egg opening, where that's where miracles can happen, from the open circle. So he talks about the suffering of women in pregnancy and childbirth, representing this opening to suffering, and their opening to suffering and bringing birth in through the sacred, through the divine realms into the circle of suffering on this planet, is that they are making a contradictory movement against the idea of this closed circle, which women open the circle again through the birthing process. She's moving in a contrary sense. So the closed circle is represented by the serpent. The symbol of the serpent eating its tail is called the Ouroboros, Ouroboros. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Ouroboros, Ouroboros. The snake eating its tail, which is that closed system that represents the world presented by the serpent. It's the wheel of eternal repetition. It is just eternal repetition, and it never opens. But the opening of the Christian, the whole Hermetic Christian attitude is that it's an open circle which opens into a spiral. So a spiral is always progressing, or it can be spiraling and involuting, or it can be spiraling and evolving, but that's the movement. So on and on about Nietzsche and all his vanity and Ecclesiastes and King Solomon. King Solomon's book on Ecclesiastes being a place in the Bible where this inexorable fate of man is depicted, because it is an existential state that man finds himself in, where all is vanity, there's nothing new under the sun. That's the world, that's the closed world of hell. That's the closed world without Christ and without miracles and without redemption. So the world without Christ sighing for deliverance, says Tomberg. I don't want to go into all the Nietzsche stuff, all that stuff. The miracles point to the world as an open circle. That's the essential thought that I took away from this, that miracles break out of the circular system. And that's coming directly from what's called the uncreated sphere, the Sabbath. And he points out that all religions insist on miracles, and that's an interesting thing to think about. All religions insist on miracles. So that the good news is marked by, like, the festivals of Christmas and Ascension are marking the entrance and the exit beyond this world, that there is this opening of the circle, that the divine can enter, and we can leave and re-enter the divine realms. So on and on. He goes on to just define perdition, salvation. These words, he needs to flesh them out to make them real. To be caught up, perdition being caught up in this closed world without a Sabbath. Salvation being the life in the world of the open circle. The miracle in the infinite chain of miracles, infinite knowledge, and that God is knowable. God is knowable through revelation. And that is another key thing. So in the fall, the world is worthy of being lauded and wept for. I love that. The world is worthy of being lauded and wept for, which is a contradiction, because there's a basic contradiction between the harmonious totality, the harmony of the spheres, and the details on our planet, the details of our existence, which are sickness and death. So we have this, but that is the total picture. Harmony of the spheres, beautiful natural harmony, and sickness and death. So we have a natural and an unnatural world. And when you open up the spiral, you open up to the supernatural world also. So that's also opening the circle. So science, so anyway, goes on to what the Hermetic view of the field of existence, which is where the created world, the created world, capital W, the world that emanated from the word, that's the world within the world. That's the world of the serpent. That is what the Hermeticist calls the field. So then he goes into dualism, on and on and on. He talks about these really interesting concepts about enfoldment, blossoming, and radiation. So he's putting these into, really interesting. He's putting them into these verbs to try to visualize these metaphysical concepts. Enfoldment, which is what the planets are. That also represents autonomous isolation. And it's represented by the brains, which are involuted and enfolded upon themselves. And then there's the impulse of blossoming, which he describes, flowers, foliage unfolding, and that the plants really represent this process beautifully. And so that's why I think we find Rosicrucianism, they use the rose as a symbolic representative of slowly blooms the rose within, so I'll get back to that. The association, so then there's radiation from the sun. So there's enfoldment, of which represents the planets or solidity. There's a blossom